Story 1, maybe not crash and burn, but there was a guy who was close personal friends with the chief executive officer. He owned so much company stock that if he sold his shares, it had to be cleared with the board of directors and filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission under Rule 144 as a registered secondary offering. The company was bought out, which included trading his shares. If he sold, it would have been really bad for the stock prices. So they gave him whatever job he wanted, and he worked with me. He was unfireable. After a few years, some hotshot young manager fired him. The reasons were long and stupid, but it boiled down to, I don't like his attitude. Instead of saying, "Ha, you can't fire me," he said, "Okay," and filed a registration statement to sell his shares. I don't know how much he made, but it was more than $90 million. It was his right. The board was forced to approve it, he paid taxes, and retired in his 40s. The company stock price fell about 15% that week. That manager was fired, presumably out of a cannon. Story 2. The Coors Company has long made ceramic laboratory filters. They custom-made a large version of the mass-produced laboratory filters, and we had one at my company. We wanted another one, so we placed an order. We were told that a certain expert retired and no one else could make them that large without cracking. The expert apparently could not impart whatever skill was required to others. I have no idea if they gave up on making them, as we switched to a different type after that. Maybe it was just a tall tale. Story 3. An absolute star in an engineering company who, despite growing his side of the business, increasing efficiency, cutting costs, and gaining additional relevant training and qualifications in his own time, had not had a meaningful pay rise in 5 years. He gave notice after accepting a new position with a 60% pay increase. The company immediately countered with an 80% pay rise offer. Knowing his worth the entire time but refusing to pay until they had to enraged him so much that they turned an amicable separation into a hostile one. He pursued their clients aggressively, and while the company still exists, it is much smaller than before. Story 4. I had a systems administrator die from coronavirus disease, and he took several important passwords to his grave. This caused a huge compliance issue as backups were no longer accessible since he never wrote down the passwords. Story 5. The person who knew the clients had relationships with them and understood the history of the clients and the company. They got rid of that person, and soon after, clients started leaving because they did not like how they were being treated. The person who could resolve conflicts was no longer there. Story 6. There was a printing shop that had been around forever. The owner knew everyone in the business. He discovered he could get a contract to print and fold small instruction sheets for medicine. It was a huge contract to print millions of these sheets. He knew the person who had the printer, another who had the cutter, and another who had the folder. These machines were not being used. He bought all 3 pieces without letting anyone know about his contract, so he got them cheaply. Then he set it all up for continuous feed and had one well-paid employee running the entire operation. He made back his investment in the first print run, and then it became a big moneymaker. Eventually, he sold the business and retired. The new owner saw one person running this single print job. He thought the person was only feeding in paper and stacking the product at the other end. Obviously, he was being overpaid for this. So he let that person go and hired a cheaper worker just to put in the paper and stack the product. However, the operator he let go was not just doing those tasks. The 3 machines needed constant adjustment. Someone had to monitor them, someone with the experience that cannot be easily taught. If the printer was picking up paper slightly off-center, you turn a knob to the right position. If the folder was not creasing correctly, you move a lever slightly. It required constant checking and fine-tuning. The operator simply found another high-skill job at a different print shop. Without the experienced operator, the entire process went off the rails. The product failed quality checks. The contract was lost. That contract represented a large portion of the shop's revenue at the time. It did not take long for the new owner to cause the collapse of a 45-year-old business. Story 7. Not a crash and burn, but almost a critical system failure. New management came in and reviewed payments to outside labor and contracts. They found one such payment, made annually to a person out west, amounting to $20,000 a year. They asked the wrong people, decided this was unnecessary, and canceled the payments and retainer. Apparently, this person was an expert code writer for a system long out of use but very much relied upon by the company. This is similar to how critical infrastructure often depends on small, outdated software unknown to most. IT found out later that they were never consulted or involved in the decision. They basically said that without this person, the system would fail. Management reinstated the payment, and the expert remains on retainer. Story 8. They removed the CEO who genuinely cared for employees and grew the company significantly. The explanation was that they needed someone to manage the company at that level. In reality, the major investor wanted their own person in charge. They made unrealistic promises about an initial public offering, which never happened. The leaders they brought in subsequently dismantled everything that made the company great. It became so bad that company-wide goodbye emails, once common, were banned. Attempts were made to reverse some decisions to stop the decline, but the damage was already done. Frequent leadership changes caused the product strategy to become non-existent, with products being the flagship one year and discontinued the next. The company is still operating but is only a shadow of what it once was. Many employees who contributed to the company's success recognized the decline and left. Story 9. I make a product that requires a high-quality bottle and cap. During the COVID-19 pandemic, supplies were becoming scarce. I secured some bottles, although of lesser quality. However, caps were a nightmare. I contacted the supply chain. I ended up talking to the owner of the largest manufacturer of the caps I need in the United States. Turns out they were completely shut down. There was one technician in Slovakia who could fix and service their machine, but he could not travel because of COVID-19. I asked, with a mildly condescending tone, if there was a manual or if I could video call with this technician. I was stonewalled. He was the only technician, and we were waiting for him. Fortunately, he survived and came to the United States to fix the machine 8 weeks later. Story 10. There is a notable difference in the quality of asphalt used on Oregon highways since my grandfather passed away. He retired twice and stayed on as a consultant until the day he died. They called my grandmother after he died, and when she told them he had passed, she said they seemed more broken up about it than she was after 40 years of marriage. Story 11. I had a colleague at one job who landed our largest client ever, Ford Motor Company, a $22 million software contract. They fired him immediately after the contract was signed, using a fabricated reason of not being a team player to avoid paying his commission for the sale. The company never found another big client after that, and 6 months later, the layoffs began. Story 12. I left my former employer as the foreman at a hardscape company to start my own business a year and a half ago. The company is shutting down after this year. It turns out people with more than 10 years in the industry are basically non-existent. No one remembers to take care of their bodies. When you offer low pay to start, you'll get poor help. They simply could not replace me, and they couldn't afford my new self-imposed salary to bring me back. Part of me feels guilty watching them struggle, but my life has greatly improved since leaving. The moral of the story is if your company relies on a single person to operate, you are probably doing something wrong. Story 13. It was my dad. He was the lead software engineer for the largest client. The company he worked for built automation equipment, and they did work for a large glass manufacturer. They absolutely loved him. Corporate removed the general manager of his branch, and he got a bad feeling from the new manager. So he left, and they lost that main customer within 6 months. The branch closed down less than a year later. Story 14. I read a story a while back, but I can't find it, so hopefully I don't butcher it. There was a man who worked at a sausage factory. His job was to push carts full of sausages from the production area to the smokehouse. Eventually, his job was automated and he was let go, but the quality of the product declined. Nobody could figure out why the sausages had different flavor and texture. It was realized that the time it took for the man to push the cart to the smokehouse was essential in the process. They hired him back and had him push the sausages through a winding corridor to mimic the time it would have taken to traverse his old route. The sausages immediately regained their flavor and texture. When he finally retired, they had to automate his job by having the sausages traverse a time-based path. I think they named the machine after him. I thought it was a fun story. Sorry, I can't find the original. Maybe someone else can. Thanks everyone for the link to the story. It is such a wonderful reminder about how any job can make a huge impact on people. It just might not be as obvious as this one. Take pride in what you do, no matter how big or small, because it is making an impact on someone. Story 15. Apparently, I was this guy and didn't even know it. I worked for a managed service provider, a generic information technology company, and was the fourth employee. I was there for about 2 years, and by that time, we were about 15 people strong. The company had many good-paying clients, and I knew the intricacies of every single one of them. My job was to drive to each client once a week and perform whatever information technology tasks they needed. Migrate an email server to the cloud? Done. Reset Karen's password again? Done. Replace the toner in the office printer? Done. I was basically contacted to do anything and everything they needed related to information technology. Before I was hired, my job was done by the two founders, and when they brought me on, they took a more administrative approach to grow the business. I loved my job. I didn't have to go to the same office every day. I had a company truck, a company credit card for gas, and the freedom to take my time and do what needed to be done on my schedule. Eventually, the company grew too large and supported too many clients for just me to handle, so we hired more and more technicians. However, I was by far the most experienced and technical person on the team aside from the founders. After about 2 years, a friend who worked at Amazon Web Services reached out to me and suggested I apply to work there. I did, and I got the job. My pay at the managed service provider was about $42,000 per year, and my job offer at Amazon was $80,000 with a $20,000 signing bonus, moving package, and stock options. So, I took the job and left the managed service provider. About 8 months later, the managed service provider fell apart. Apparently, none of the other technicians made my regular clients happy. One of the founders tried to do my job and quickly realized how much work I actually did for them. He realized it wasn't sustainable and couldn't keep up with the workload. He told his business partner they had to hire about 3 more people to do my job, but the partner said they couldn't afford it. Clients started getting upset at the subpar service from other technicians, and one of the founding partners quit. In less than a year, the company went under, and the other founder moved north to California to become a sommelier. At no point did I ever expect to be the downfall of that company. Story 16. A software engineer I worked with had developed nearly every module for our company's warehouse management system. He left after 30 years, and then things started to break that no one knew how to fix. Warehouses were down for nearly a week while he negotiated his return. I do not know what his salary ended up being, but he did have every June and July off, and we had a software deployment blackout during those months as a result. Story 17. The official name is bus factor, which refers to how many employees could be lost before the company cannot operate. Story 18. My supervisor was the head of the department. I worked as a front-end developer in a very small marketing agency. My supervisor was not only our sole back-end developer, but also responsible for managing client lists, our monthly phone messages to clients, and the entire server that housed all files. As soon as he left, I was left with nothing to do, and soon after, the agency closed down. Story 19. I was that person. I worked for a company that provided services for buildings, specifically large high-rise ones. Maintenance, repairs, and so forth. I was part of a 4-person team responsible for pricing and financial planning and analysis for contracts, reconciliation, and related tasks on a national level. The company was acquired by a competitor seeking to gain some of our specializations and enhance market dominance on the West Coast. My team immediately left for another competitor without informing me, leaving me in charge of everything. I managed for about a year, repeatedly informing leadership that replacements were needed. They never hired anyone. I attempted to take vacation time to avoid burnout, but my request was denied. No one could cover my responsibilities. I eventually left the company. Last I heard, the company was losing contracts. I believe this was due to their inability to find other departments capable of performing the work my team and I handled competently. To answer the original question directly, they lost years of domain knowledge about our clients, their financial nuances, risk factors, and a general understanding of how our financial systems functioned. Story 20. Back in the 1960s, my dad drove a delivery route delivering eggs to restaurants and stores. One restaurant had a great cook. His cooking was widely known, and the restaurant was always packed. He asked for a raise but was told they could not afford it. Another restaurant offered him a substantial raise, and he accepted. He had a growing family and needed the money. His former employer lost a lot of business and eventually closed. Story 21. My small town forced retirements to hire new employees at lower wages. The only place that had accurate water distribution maps was in the mind of a person they forced to retire. This was 20 years ago, and they had to pay him nearly $50,000 to return and work with someone to transfer the maps onto paper. Story 22. Laughing out loud, yeah, me. I went to work at a plastics plant. I started as a forklift driver, learned how to make mixes, how the machines worked, and how to maintain everything. I was promoted to maintenance, then to line manager, and then to plant manager. The plant was sold. A new manager came in, fired everyone, and changed everything. He tried to hire me back at 75% of my former pay. I told him to kick rocks. He called me a week later and offered me my former position at the same pay. I told him I would take a 10% raise. He hung up on me. He called me again the following week and agreed to my terms. The manager was very difficult to work for. Finally, he pushed me too far and told me I had no idea what I was doing. I walked out. He screamed at me when I left that I was not special and that he would have me replaced before I got out of the parking lot. Over the next few weeks, I received a couple of calls from former coworkers telling me that everything was falling apart. The place went out of business in 6 months. Story 23. That was me. When I joined the company, they were losing money and barely surviving by getting loans from the owner's parents. I identified 2 major reasons: inaccurate shipping estimates and slow client onboarding, because the entire process was manual. In the first month, I created a framework that transformed the poor manual process of estimating shipping into an automated data-driven process, turning a 30% average loss per shipment into a 20% profit. For onboarding, the client's inventory used to be manually assessed item by item for international compliance. There were many errors because the people performing this task were minimum wage workers and not experts in compliance. The company was able to onboard about 4 clients per month this way. I then developed a system that could automatically handle about 95% of the task in a fraction of the time with greater accuracy. Before I left, they were onboarding over 30 clients per month with the same size team. The company made such a turnaround that it was acquired by a Fortune 50 company for around $40 million. I even gave a presentation to their chief executive officer on the systems I developed and received about $25,000 as a bonus for it. However, both of these systems required regular maintenance and proper training for end users to ensure they were used correctly. After I left, the systems were not maintained, and the people I had trained were not knowledgeable enough to train others adequately. The company quickly started deteriorating to the point that they considered suing the previous owners. Story 24. There was a man who had been there for 10 years when I was hired. I knew more about databases and they wanted to promote me into a lead role. I told them to promote him instead, and I would help with the database side. They did not. He left. We were a creative space product that integrated with Adobe Photoshop. I did not have knowledge about Adobe Photoshop. The company was acquired, and everyone was laid off except for a skeleton crew to offshore all operations. Story 25. We had an application that was literally our bread and butter. It was the only application the entire company used to enter their data. Everything that made us money went through this application. We were a company of about 200 people and 2 IT teammates controlled the application. They were the only ones with admin access and knowledge of how it worked. We had been building a team to support it but never got that far. The company was bought out. The new owners decided to cut costs and let go of everyone on the IT team except me, probably because I was making the least amount of money. I was more than happy to watch the situation unfold. The company scrambled, but honestly, they were so big that our small company did not matter to them. They treated everyone poorly, and I left too. Story 26. My wife worked at a preschool for years. She organized and delegated events, decorated for them, and engaged with every family that came through the doors. Several longtime families and coworkers told her she was the face of the school many times. Most parents noticed that quickly, too. Everyone who entered the school knew her to some degree. In the 6 months after she left, many families followed suit. About 20 different families talked to her about leaving the school because of the chaos, terrible events, and obvious licensing violations that were too much to handle. Parents called her in tears because of how the new administration treated them. Currently, only 3 of her former coworkers are still there. She left less than a year ago and is now enjoying a paid summer vacation. Story 27. When I worked at E.F. Hutton, the chief executive officer was upset that the top broker made more money than he did and let everyone know it. The broker left. Then the company got in trouble for check kiting, which was a form of collecting interest on money that was supposed to be in non-interest accruing demand deposit accounts. Ego over profits. Story 28. At one point, the company I worked for, a retail store, had a safe that was broken. I, the assistant manager, and my boss, the store manager, knew how to open it. There was a trick that took us weeks to learn. It cost a lot to fix the safe, and we complained constantly because it was a nightmare to open before we figured out the trick. The company refused to fix it for years, saying it was working fine since we could open and close the store every day. They saw no problem worth spending that much money on. My boss quit eventually, unrelated to the safe, and it took them over a year to replace him. I quit about 6 months later because the 2 of us had been keeping everything afloat, and without him, it was unbearable. I did not realize the situation I created until 2 days after my final shift when the store called my cell phone. They left a voicemail saying they had not been able to get cash for 2 days because nobody could open the safe, and they wanted to know how I had been doing it. I described it to them, but the store was an hour away, and I was not going that far. They could not understand. If it had been an ex-coworker calling, I might have helped more, but it was the corporate regional manager filling in at the store, the same person who had refused to spend the money to fix the safe in the first place, so I let him deal with it. It was my problem for years and was ignored. Now that it was his problem for 2 days, it was an emergency. The store was unable to conduct cash sales for nearly a month until it was fixed. Story 29. When I worked for a major telecommunications company, we had a manager who had come up through the union ranks. He had built and programmed a Unix system consisting of several personal computers, which took messages from long-distance carriers, diagnosed the problems, referred the ticket to the appropriate work center, and when the problem was resolved and the ticket closed, tested the circuit again and sent it back to the long-distance carrier as resolved. But he did not have a college degree, and when the company decided that all managers had to have degrees, he was let go. Sadly, he was the only one who knew the system he had built in intimate detail. Another technician and I could reboot the system, but if anything went wrong that wasn't resolved by a reboot, there was nothing we could do or would do, since neither of us was being paid for that job. Ultimately, the system failed. 4 technicians were assigned to do the work the system had been doing for as long as it took the company to put out a request for a new system, take bids, and get the new system built and installed, which, as it turned out, never happened. Story 30. Not the same, but today I stopped by my old workplace to say hi. I wanted to keep some connections open. It was the first time I had seen my old boss since I left. I was underpaid by about $20,000 a year and had minimal support and respect. I was not prepared. In the 6 months I had been gone, my old boss aged more than the 10 years I was there. Startling. I cannot say I have any regrets, but still. Story 31. I worked a cafe job after college. I put my heart and soul into that job. I was working almost every hour it was possible to be scheduled. I knew the entire regular customer base. Everyone assumed I was the manager. I did 95% of front-of-house responsibilities. I worked extremely hard all summer. The manager had it out for me. She was a townie mom with a high school, mean girl mentality. As soon as Labor Day passed, she fired me because, "We just don't need you anymore." I let it go and accepted it because by that point I was tired. I have seen her probably 10 times in the last 10 years. She has profusely apologized every single time, saying she has so much to be sorry for. The guilt, shame, and defeat are so palpable, written all over her face. I can't imagine how much she realized I did and how upset people were when I was gone. The owner sold the cafe shortly after I left. I think the manager ran it into the ground, or he did not want to deal with her. Story 32. The company did not fail, but during the pandemic, when the shaped glass worker at the largest glass plant in Toronto contracted COVID-19 seriously, all the shaped glass sealed units we received were defective. There were constant errors and problems. When we called to complain, they said, "Ernie has COVID. This is unacceptable for a multi-million-dollar company." Story 33. The transport company manager who was handling all the accounts in a major city left abruptly. He established his own company within 2 weeks and still manages all those accounts. The original company is still operating but with significantly reduced business. Story 34. The company is still there. It is not the kind of business that will ever really go under, as it is an assisted living facility. I worked at one as a chef where the executive director, the boss of the entire facility, truly understood the mission. According to her, everyone's job, from top to bottom, was to do their best to make the residents as happy as possible. To achieve that, she knew she needed quality staff. While she could not control compensation, as that was above her level, she treated everyone well and held almost monthly employee raffle contests and celebrations. They raffled off items like 65-inch TVs, pizza ovens, gift cards for massages, and more. It was a great way to keep staff morale high, and the residents loved seeing the staff appreciated beyond their thanks. All of the department heads followed her ethos. If the residents requested something and we could reasonably do it, we were to do it regardless of cost or effort. We exceeded budgets monthly, but she argued to corporate that we were about 98% full with an exceptionally high resident satisfaction rate compared to other facilities in the area. I think they passed her up for a promotion for the third or fourth time, and a competitor offered her her dream job with significantly better pay and benefits. None of us blamed her for leaving, as much as we all wanted her to stay. Within 4 months of her departure, 6 out of the 7 department heads had resigned, with several being escorted out on their last day despite giving the required month's notice. The kitchen department held out the longest, about 5.5 months, before our culinary director got fed up with 80-hour weeks and managing a menu on a budget that barely covered half the costs. While department heads resigned, a new executive director started, and immediately everything shifted from, "It's about the residents," to, "They need to learn to live within our budgets." Every new manager cared more about advancing their careers or their side businesses than the job itself, but they strictly adhered to the budget. With every new manager, staff began leaving in large numbers. It has been less than 2 years since I left, and only one of the original 5 chefs is still there. All of them had many years of service with the company, and they left because of how everything changed. For those 8 months under the original director, I was honestly the happiest I had ever been at a job. By the time I left, it was one of the worst positions I had ever held. Just to add, as soon as the original director left, any employee appreciation events beyond an occasional pizza party disappeared, including Employee of the Month awards. After she left, multiple residents expressed dissatisfaction with how the facility was being run, especially to us chefs. They did not blame the employees, but several who had never shown any aggression toward staff regularly talked about confronting managers, and this was not due to medical or mental changes. It was the management. Several residents moved out of the facility entirely after the original director's departure, citing the decline in service quality as the primary reason. One couple moved to another facility to be closer to family and chose to live in a competitor's facility located directly across the street from ours in the new area. Story 35. My sales manager left, and suddenly long-term customers started leaving in large numbers. It turned out the sales manager was spending a lot of money taking them out and disguising the costs as if he was traveling with sales representatives and paying for meals and events. Story 36. A hostile takeover occurred, resulting in the removal of the previous chief executive officer and board members. During staffing decisions, an individual in the information technology department was identified as only downloading data from the server, anonymizing it, and delegating it to the rest of the department for processing, tasks that could have been done internally. Consequently, they chose not to offer him a new contract. The previous chief executive officer knew this person was performing minimal work because he was actually the client whose data was being processed. This client was very meticulous about keeping his client's data safe and anonymous and was technically employed only to facilitate system access. Therefore, they inadvertently terminated the contract of their largest client. Story 37. Years ago, I was the director of operations for a company that had approximately 1,000 employees. I managed a large portion of the operations, with only the chief executive officer and president above me. Unfortunately, someone in charge of the financial records got too involved with his drug dealer and ended up misusing company funds. I took a nice vacation. When I was looking for a job upon my return, I was contacted about consulting at a startup that was a virtual replica of my previous company. They agreed to pay me a significant amount of money, mostly based on production. If I didn't deliver, I wouldn't get paid much. I delivered, and I delivered big. The company took off almost immediately, and I knew that at the 90-day mark, I would receive a very healthy payment. When 90 days passed, I did not get paid. The next day, my contract was not renewed, and I was promised a check in the mail. I waited a couple of weeks and called the owner looking for my payment. The response was, "It must have been lost," followed by excuses. A week later, I received a check that wasn't signed. Then I received a check for the wrong amount. When I realized they were not going to pay me, I made one phone call that lasted less than 60 seconds. The company I was consulting for was new in the industry and didn't know me. The person who had initially offered me the consulting job was the financier of the company and also owned the product being sold by the company. I told the owner of the finance company, someone I am quite close friends with, that I delivered everything I promised and more, yet they had booted me and refused to pay. My friend told me he would call me right back. He contacted the owner of the company to try to resolve the issue, but he was stonewalled. Nothing changed. I was still unpaid. My friend cut ties with the company. No more product to sell and no more financial backing for the product. I also lost out on 6 weeks of funded sales because my friend had to reserve funds for refunds and cancellations. That was nearly 20 years ago, and this still upsets me. I hope Freddie reads this and remembers the sting of screwing me out of my contracted pay. Story 38. The shop manager at a machining and manufacturing shop I worked for was let go. The official reason was something about his attitude, but it was because he had cancer and they did not want to deal with him needing time off. He was let go, and they brought in a new manager who went out of his way to shake things up. He moved people onto projects they had never worked on before, taking them off what they had always done. People were doing tasks for which they had never been trained, while the person who could train them was now doing their old job. Jobs kept getting rejected by quality assurance. The owner sided with the new shop manager, eliminated quality assurance, and approved everything. Our clients were the United States Navy and the United States Postal Service. Once those parts were rejected by them enough times, the work just ended. In 8 months, they laid off over 70% of the floor workers and mandated overtime for the few remaining projects. Less than a year later, they sold the building and a bunch of equipment and moved halfway across the state to a smaller facility. The company is still open, but they went from nearly 100 factory workers and 5 main sales employees to 10 and 1. Story 39. Didn't leave but died, and basically took the business with him. He worked for a driving service that served people with disabilities who couldn't drive, such as those who were blind or elderly. He was always courteous and on time. The other drivers were inconsistent, late, and not kind. After he died, the few other decent people left, and the owner can no longer manage the business. Story 40. My friend used to work at a bar and did many different jobs such as cooking, being a disc jockey, and assisting the bartenders. Before he left, he said they would not last a month without him. He was right. They shut down about a month after he left. Story 41. Oh, he was so much more foolish than that. I worked for a company that contracted with doctor offices and hospitals to handle insurance billing. That was the entire operations department's role. They knew all the players on both sides, all the federal and state regulations, and all the places where they could push, tweak, or untangle paperwork to get the money. The company decided to offshore those tasks to India, after India was no longer the optimal country for offshoring. Then they laid off the entire operations department. 80 people suddenly without a job. Approximately 1,000 worker years of institutional knowledge disappeared as if snapped away. It took 2 weeks of zero productivity, while those of us in information technology had to deal with overseas contractors inventing problems and breaking processes to hide their inability to meet service levels. But the company reversed course and rehired as many of the laid-off employees as possible. To my surprise, they brought back about 2/3 of them. People who understand medical billing are never short of work, but I understand why many just wanted their old jobs back. Once they reinstated the operations department, they assigned them to train the contractors, which did not work, and then to supervise them, which also failed. At that time, the company was being purchased by a multinational healthcare corporation and had just signed a contract that more than doubled their client base with one company. First, the new client sued the company aggressively. When it became clear that management was as inept as they appeared, the new owners took over the clients and systems and shut the company down. I quit about a year before all that happened. Honestly, every intelligent person in information technology saw the writing on the wall and searched for an exit as well. Story 42. She retired. Suddenly, an important daily report stopped being distributed. She had been preparing it daily for years, and no one else knew how. Just as suddenly, no one could figure out how to do it as she did. I believe her boss was fired over it. It was a very public failure. Story 43. My company is on the verge of a serious problem. I work in a large hotel in a big city. The hotel is somewhat old, built in the early 1990s. Due to its age, the building has constant issues with plumbing, walk-in refrigerators, ceiling and wall leaks during rain, and similar problems. Most of the maintenance tasks are handled by one person. He does not trust any of the other engineers to do the job as well as he does, so no one has been trained on many of the crucial tasks he performs. If he quits, retires, or becomes injured, the hotel will face major difficulties. The utility schematics are outdated and no longer accurate. None of the other engineers understand how the systems are connected or what to do if there is a breakdown in one of the critical systems. This is not to mention that everything is currently held together with temporary fixes and hope. It will be a major crisis once he leaves. Story 44. Not one individual, but I worked at a large, struggling media company that was trying to turn the situation around. My team had been doing an intense effort on marketing and promotions, significantly improving the ratings of our original programming well beyond normal expectations. We were outperforming beyond our capacity. However, there was a political struggle in the executive leadership which resulted in our team being eliminated. The ratings began to decline rapidly the very next week. Within days, the situation deteriorated drastically. Eventually, the lack of promotional support caused the entire initiative to fail, leading to the bankruptcy and eventual sale of parts of the company until it essentially ceased to exist. Story 45. Dogecoin eliminated the entire purchasing department at our National Institutes of Health Institute. The only person who has a purchase card in our department is a PhD in molecular biology. His main role is now purchasing, not science. Also, since the purchase card limit is $10,000, we cannot renew the service contract on the analytical instruments that analyze drugs for clinical trials. Story 46. I just watched a documentary on the Titan submarine that imploded. Many people raised concerns, but money and ego led to the tragedy. Story 47. I worked as a local technician for a multi-state information technology contractor about 10 years ago. One of the companies I regularly supported was an accounting firm that mainly dealt with company taxes. On one of my first visits, I found an old Windows XP computer in the rack. The only thing I could find on it was that it held a giant Microsoft Access database. When I asked what it was for, they told me it held their homebrewed customer information database that tied into some mail merge macros they used for sending out customer correspondence. It was not their actual tax processing application, just the customer information. They were very afraid of doing anything with it because just looking at it the wrong way would cause it to display a blue screen of death. I told them that it was so out of date that our monitoring and backup tools would not work on it, but they insisted it was okay as Jane was the only person who did anything with it. Jane was their rather nice older receptionist who also built and maintained the database. She was proud to tell anyone that she learned how to do it after taking some community college classes. She was also the person who fixed it after one of the many crashes would tie it into knots. They also had a powerful server stack that was drastically overkill for what they used it for. We are talking about a Dell PowerEdge R920 dual high-end Intel Xeon processors, 64 gigabytes of random access memory per processor, plus a Dell MD1200 array that was stuffed full as well for well over 100 terabytes of raw storage. The server only ran Active Directory, some small file shares, and the print server. Easily $10,000 to $15,000 of hardware. Basically a sports car they did not drive over 30 miles per hour. I offered to at least virtualize the Windows XP computer to the server since that would provide some kind of redundancy with virtual machine backups, plus our already in-place cloud backup of their server. Again, they said no thanks. I also suggested moving the database out of Microsoft Access and into structured query language as it was a much better solution for a database of that size and importance. I estimated roughly 20 hours to port the database and test, or about 10 hours to build Hyper-V and virtualize the computer. I was also going to tidy up the spaghetti monster of the cabling in their racks during the wait times at no extra cost. I brought it up a couple more times, but they never went with it. 2 years later, Jane passed away. 3 months after, the Windows XP computer finally had a crash that it could not recover from as the motherboard fried and took everything else with it. Jane had never showed anyone how the database or macros worked, and there was no backup of any of it. It took them 6 weeks to find a contractor, purchase, and implement an actual customer relationship management suite with structured query language, train, and about another 50 hours of billable time for me and my company over that time to help them bring it online. Then there was the payroll for the temporary employee they brought in to enter all of the customer information. I do not know the final cost, but judging from my billable time and what some of the other customer relationship management systems I have worked with cost, it was a huge expense. Story 48. Not so much a company as a single store, but I was that guy. I used to work at Staples and was there for 6 years. If you're not aware, they make almost zero money on their actual office supplies because the markup is so tiny. They make more on technology support, but you can only work on so many computers at a time, so the income potential is limited. Their copy and print center is where the big revenue comes from. They legitimately have freestanding copy shops under their brand because it's so lucrative compared to everything else they do. That's where I was. Their copy center had an absolutely terrible woman in charge of it. She was certified white trash with a huge perm, teeth that were rotting, and a smoker's cough you could hear across the entire store, which she insisted was just allergies all year long. She insisted on doing everything the hard way because she was too incompetent to use the equipment to its full potential. She would take an order for 600 booklets folded and stapled, then print them all one page at a time, telling the person taking over the shift that they now had to hand collate, fold, and staple them because she always timed it so she never had to do it herself. Keep in mind, we were supposed to do this while also running other print jobs on the machines, keeping them loaded with paper and toner, ensuring that other machines didn't jam, tending to customers, answering phones, checking and responding to emails, and running the UPS shipping counter attached to our department. Everyone in the store was supposed to be trained to do this, but in reality, it fell solely to us. It was not sustainable. After the third time I got stuck with it, I spent about 15 minutes looking at the print settings, realized there was a built-in booklet setting, and tested it out. I had 30 booklets done in 3 minutes, and they looked better than anything we could do by hand. I tried to show her how to do this the next day, and after one step of opening the settings, she loudly said, "This is too complicated. I'm just doing it the old-fashioned way." She refused to be taught. Similarly, she seemed incapable of basic math. We had many requests to enlarge items to specific sizes. She would spend 10 minutes measuring and guessing a percentage, then hand a customer something and say, "That's as close as I can get it," instead of just measuring, dividing the desired size by the measured size, and setting that percentage on the machine to get exactly what was wanted. She, again, refused to learn. There were many things like this on various machines that she made into an all-day job, when automation could make it a 30-minute task, increasing production and profit because we could get so much more done. When she wouldn't listen, I showed the other associate in the department to make their lives easier. We only ever had the department head, me, and one other associate on staff. In my 6 years there, we went through 12 other associates because they got tired of dealing with her while I silently hated her and kept at it. I had numerous customers with large jobs that I took in and completed by myself, turning a huge profit. Customers eventually called the home office to praise my efforts. One year during annual reviews, the general manager told me that literally nobody in the store got a raise except me because the home office had heard so much good about me. You would think they would have fired the problematic department head who was dragging things down and couldn't get work done efficiently. But no, she stayed there indefinitely because they didn't want the trouble of firing her. What they did do, however, was listen when she accused me of intentionally trying to undermine her and make her look bad by teaching the other associates how to do things easier and more efficiently but not showing her. Despite my attempts, she refused to learn. That was enough for them to pull me aside one night and tell me they had to let me go. I had another job a week later and kept hearing customers from Staples who acted like they lost their best friend and asked, "Why did you leave me? I can't get anything done properly anymore," because they fired the only competent person in the department. About 6 months later, I stopped by the store because I needed paper and it was right next to my house. Half the lights were off, the copy center was empty with no machines running. There was only one employee on the floor, and 2 managers had apparently been let go and replaced, including the one who had fired me. I asked a manager from a nearby store what was going on, and he said their profits had taken a nosedive because the copy center was making about a quarter of what it used to. Management couldn't improve things, so they started cutting payroll, firing managers who couldn't deliver, and were so down on luck that they even had to cut back on the electricity bill. It's not much in the long run, but it makes me feel good to know I was worth about 75% of the profit for that store by myself. Without me, the customers and performance just vanished overnight. They refused to get rid of one bad employee because it would have been too much hassle, and instead got rid of the only person who could endure her and keep the store afloat. Sucks to suck, I guess. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.